Hey, this is Michael Lindsay from Vital MX. We're out here at Fox Raceway today for our first impression on the 2022 KTM 250 SXF Factory Edition. This is the most all-new KTM 250 that they've ever produced since basically the bike came out. We're really excited to ride today. We also want to thank the people that present and make these tests happen for us, Fox and Bel-Ray. They allow us to put out these great videos for you guys to watch. Make sure you check them out. And like I said, there's so much new about this bike. I could talk about it forever. Check out the first look. Bubbles up here. It has all the nitty and gritty because I'm going to jump right into what it was like to ride. You've probably heard us and about any other media outlet talk about it for years. The outgoing KTM 250, the Husky, the Gas, that whole lineage of bikes, they have great 250 engines. They're very broad. They're screamers. They make big horsepower numbers. But some of the negative that some people feel with them is that they're almost too broad, that they're lethargic. They take a long time to rev in certain situations, and they maybe don't have the excitement or punch or feel of some of their competition. KTM took a swing at that by introducing this all-new engine. In general, this whole bike is the most all-new 250F they've probably put out there, and a big change with the engine is the bore and stroke. For a long time, KTM's had this short stroke, large bore screamer engine. A lot of the other OEMs have moved towards them, so they've taken a whole nother jump beyond that. However, that doesn't mean that this bike screams even more. There's a kind of that balance with bore and stroke, and by moving even farther uphill, they've actually made the bike more mid-range happy. It's a lot more exciting in the mid-range. Low to mid performance is just a lot snappier, a lot more aggressive on this bike. It revs a lot quicker, and it's just really just a lot more fun. However, what's that done to the top end? It's still good. Don't get me wrong. It's maybe not quite as broad and endless feeling as the outgoing engine, but it still makes great power up top. It's just how quickly it gets there has really changed. It's made to the point, man, second gear is aggressive, but goes a little quick on this bike. I found myself shifting it faster in the old bike, but because it's accelerating so much harder and you have to get to that next gear. They've really made a big push to make sure that the mapping options on the bike stock are very noticeably different. Before you'd go between what was considered the standard map and the aggressive map, and it was a little bit more. This bike, it's a lot. The standard map is a little closer to the old bike. It's a little broader feeling. It's really connected off the bottom, a little bit smoother. You go to the aggressive map, which is where I spent most of my time today, and it's punchy, it's exciting. It revs quick and it gets up and moves quick. It makes it just put in that goal of slamming a corner in second, immediately pulling that shift to third, and then just wringing its neck. Third lasts quite a long time, maybe not quite as much as the old bike. And then I never could find the rev limiter in fourth. Even out here at Fox Raceway today, it's a big, fast track. I never could use up everything this thing had to give to me in fourth gear, and who knows what fifth gear even feels like. So all in all, I would say the engine is probably better for the mass consumer. Most guys that jump on this bike are gonna like the extra low to mid. They're gonna like the excitement, the performance. Maybe your vet guy's dropping down from a 450. You're gonna like this bike, the kids are. Maybe your absolute top-end pro that could use that screamer feel out of the old bike and use the broad ability, they might appreciate the old engine just a little bit more, but I think what they built is better for the masses by a pretty good margin. Talking a little bit more about the electronics, yeah, we have our map switches, we have our up-down on the left side. They've gone to a control cluster that has map up, map down for standard and aggressive map. It's got the traction control KTM has had for a long time. I tend not to use it on the 250 very much. I don't like the intrusiveness. It isn't major, don't get me wrong, just when the rear steps out, when the bike senses a quick RPM spike, it tends to back down the power a little bit. If it's really slick, really muddy, it is useful. We had good dirt today, good conditions, no real need to use that setting. The quick shifter, quick blip, a lot of guys know this from road racing. You hold the throttle wide open and you just grab the shifter and the bike will cut for a second. It has a strain gauge on the shift shaft or the drum that basically picks up that strain, that movement and load that the foot is placing on the shifter. And if you exceed the load that's required, it will cut the ignition for just a second to reduce the load on the engine. I tested it on a couple starts. I tested it while riding. It's got pros and cons. I thought it was weird under starts is under really heavy load, yes, it does work, but I felt like the blip was a little more aggressive than I had hoped. It works on the start. I didn't like feeling that much of a cut though going into jump faces. I think the technology is really good. I want to see them keep working on it. I would love to see it, as right now when you arm the system, it's on all the time. So if you were to do a start on it and you didn't want to use it the rest of the lap, you'd have to reach up and turn it off, which is not too terribly hard to reach, but just something you have to consciously do. I'd like to see a start map engage where it works on upshifts until the first time you downshift and it disengages. That would be perfect for me. Because like I said, I don't like the intrusiveness of racing. If you were racing just on jumps and obstacles, I wouldn't want to feel that little cutout. Don't get me wrong, it takes a good amount of movement of that shifter to get it to arm. I don't feel like you're gonna bump it by accident and feel it, or a rock's gonna hit it. They made sure they did their testing and due diligence with that. But like I said, the racer in me is like, I'd like to see it improved a little bit, but very stoked that KTM is pushing technology forward. Let's move on to the chassis now. This is a big departure for KTM. If you watch the whole first look video, you can learn more about it. I'll try to thin it down as much as possible. Prior generation KTMs use a single backbone frame from the head tube all the way to where the shock mounts, meaning the force being applied to the shock, which is a lot on a dirt bike, is applied all the way up the frame into the head tube. Now the frame splits earlier into the side spars that go down the foot pegs, and similar to the Japanese bikes or the aluminum frame bikes, they have built a shock tower that comes off those side spars, goes up and has a receiver for the shock itself. Now it's not connected to the head tube. The force of the shock just pulls up on this forged tower and relieves that pressure from being sent up the frame. So basically any force applied to the shock doesn't really affect anywhere else on the chassis. Because of the shock tower, the forging, they have changed, there is a bit of different weight in the chassis. They've changed the swing arm, the axle size, and a bunch of different areas of the frame. At the end of it, it wasn't to really change any other of the handling characteristics other than removing that shock energy from being passed through the rest of it. So everything else they've done to change on this bike is to try to maintain all the other handling characteristics they've pretty much had. KTM's turn well, they're very stable, they're just a nice middle ground of comfort and rigidity. With that, I did notice a ever so small difference with the handling. I feel like the prior generation KTM chassis is maybe a little bit sharper handling on front end input, but on this bike, it's still really fantastic. And for me, it actually helps. I felt like the bike carved so well through long ruts. It didn't get upset very easily. Like I said, I don't know if a lot of this has to do with also the shock change, but under acceleration, I just felt like the bike was like a guided missile through a rut. I was very stoked with the handling on this bike. The standard sag is 105 millimeters. I went a tick lower. I think we went about 1 to 2 millimeters lower. We just did a quick change without really measuring it. I just wanted a little bit less ride height. They have changed the shock so much on this bike and the linkage ratio and everything. Basically what all this means is the bike, when accelerating, has a little bit different squat character. I felt like the ride height was a little bit on the high side, so I lowered it a little bit. Other than that, I didn't change the fork height. I was very happy with the balance of the bike. And me being at about 185 pounds probably right now, I'm 20, 25, almost 30 pounds probably over their target goal. I thought the shock was great. I went just a tick stiffer on low speed. The fork, I did make a bigger difference. I went 6 clicks stiffer on compression. I didn't feel a need to go up on air pressure though. I felt that the bike was really well balanced. It did get a little deep in the stroke on the fork under braking, so I did go up on that compression. But what I was really impressed with is when the fork was softer earlier in the morning at its base setting, is it would use a lot of the stroke. I could feel it in really sharp jump faces. If I overshot stuff, I could feel it get into the oil locks and nearly bottom, but it would get through there smoothly. There wasn't mid-stroke harshness from the fork diving really quick or anything. So I was really stoked on the plushness in the fork. The fork itself hasn't really changed overall that much on this bike. Yes, the shock has changed massively. It's completely new packaging. The shock is 15 millimeters shorter. It is not shorter stroke though. They've made the packaging of the shock smaller, but it has the same amount of travel that it used to. So your actual travel length of your shock is identical to the old bike. So the bike doesn't have less shock travel, it's just a smaller package. A lot of this had to do with the shock tower and a couple other things going on, but that's just where it ended up at. Everything on the suspension is basically toolless adjustment. There's little knobs where you can change your high and low speed compression along with your rebound on your shock, and on your fork you can do compression and rebound just by your hand being able to turn the knobs. All the plastic on this bike is pretty drastically different. The radiator shrouds have changed a lot for cooling. They have a Textron to kind of hold your leg up in the corner. The taper's changed. All the side panel airbox areas drastically changed. Something they've said they've really worked on is just how the rider connection is. And a big part of that is the foot pegs. The mounts of the foot pegs are tighter into the frame to reduce mud getting in them, and even you being able to feel the mount with the inside of your kind of toe area on your boot. So those are tucked in more, but the pegs themselves are 8 millimeters wider. They're a new design, and they're also tapered up ever so slightly, so you can sit at a wider platform with your feet. It kind of more naturally accentuates the body into that race position and allows you to have a little bit better connection with the motorcycle. We have these split power parts clamps from KTM. They're rubber mounted on the box. You can switch them to solid mounted. I really like this clamp. Even if you have a production KTM, the standard one, I recommend these things. They're just a little bit better comfort, a little bit better feel on the front end. there. Power parts, set of wheels, just all the goodies and trim pieces that make it look like a factory Red Bull KTM race bike. Per usual, when the bike is all new, a factory edition bike that's a generational change, it still has a stock pipe. They don't have an acro for this yet, or they're just coming out into dealerships with them. So we do have a stock design pipe, but it has all the bling and goodies. Same things we usually see on KTM's. Great Brembo brakes, top of the class, hydraulic clutch. Really not much I can say bad about this bike. The power character is different, and that's maybe the only negative I can give the 250. If you're really a fan of the more broad stretched feel of the old bike that spreads out farther, you may not like the quicker revving nature of this motor. I do think, again, that this is going to be better for the masses. There might be a few people that disagree, but you got to try it, find out for yourself. And I think the suspension is very on point. They've got a great balance. I think the bike's very easy to adjust. Anybody who jumps on this might have a little bit different opinion, but I think it's very easy to get a setup you like on this bike. And per their tagline, I feel like this 250 is the most race-ready bike in the class straight off the showroom floor. If you like this video, if you like the test we do on Vital MX, make sure you hit subscribe, give us the thumbs up, the whole 9 yards, so you see the rest of our videos. Helps us out, helps you out learn more. Also check out our website, vitalmx.com, and stay tuned for more videos. Thanks for joining us.